Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to see so very many of you here in Santa Clara, California. Who knows how many gazillions are also following this town hall session out there on the World Wide Web via Syscon TV or ulitzer.com. This is going to be moderated by Pete Malcolm of Abiquo. I am again going to be on the floor, so please catch my eye. So many of you were rubbing ears, or just get that hand up there when we get to that part. Peter, tell us what this is all about.
Thank you, Jeremy. So good afternoon, everyone. This is really following on from my session yesterday, my day 2 keynote. But first of all, if I could introduce my illustrious panel to you, well, at least 4 of the 5 of them. Chris Weitz is stuck on the 101 about half an hour away, so he won't be with us. But in no particular order, Sean Hackett from 451, wave Sean. Bernard from the virtualization practice, Ted Ritter from Nemertes, and Krishnan Subramanian from Krishworld. So thank you guys for joining us. So let's just give a very brief recap over the subject matter we had yesterday. And what we're really talking about here is trying to ensure that we balance the needs of all stakeholders in enterprise cloud. And by enterprise cloud, we specifically mean private, public, hybrid clouds, and in our case, it's particularly relevant to the enterprises. And there are 3 key stakeholders that we talked about yesterday. There are the IT operations organization, who are providing the physical infrastructure that makes up the cloud, which may come from data centers all around the world, may come from hosting providers, conceivably could come from public cloud providers as well. They are all providing and managing the infrastructure that creates the cloud. On the other side, we have the application and development groups who are the consumers of that and who like to have the Amazon-like experience. And between those two is a sort of group that we collectively call compliance and the CFO. And these guys are really concerned about how the virtual side maps to the physical side, where the data is, who's got use of it, make sure it can't leak out, and most important of all, making sure that this thing is actually getting us value for money. Remember, that's the whole point of the cloud. Yes, agility and all those sorts of things are great, but the bottom line is it's got to save money. We talked about our view that the cloud solutions in the market today tend to be biased in the direction of one or other of these stakeholders, principally in the direction of either the what you might call the Amazon clone products, which are really intended obviously for the application and development teams, but at the expense of what IT operations needs, or products that are reverse of that, where they're considering what IT operations needs, but really missing out on delivering what the consumers need. And then compliance and the CFO, and nobody really thinks much about them. And clearly we need to change that. So what we need is a solution that actually covers all 3 of those. That was the basis of the first part of my keynote yesterday, just to recap for those who didn't see it. So in terms of what the actual needs of those people are, the application and development teams want a complete self-service provisioning. They want to make sure that covers compute and storage and networking. Pretty much every vendor gets the compute bit right, but can you self-provision storage volumes on NetApps and EMCs and all those sorts of storage devices? We're not just talking about hypervisor storage. We saw yesterday how that can be inadequate, especially if you're an enterprise doing enterprise apps. The IT operations guys, they need to make sure that basically you can't do anything stupid, that you're automatically isolated. Each tenant in your cloud is isolated from the others in network terms. So even if one should expose, should be permitted to expose and does expose itself to the internet in an inappropriate way, it's not going to affect anybody else in the system. They're all isolated. We need to enforce resource limits so that each tenant or subtenant cannot consume more than a predictable amount of resource, so you can't get runaway situations where you physically run out of resources. And we need role-based empowerment so that we can empower our application and development teams, and indeed any user of the system, with appropriate levels of empowerment for what they want to do. That might mean that you give them the complete flexibility of the Amazon model, where you can turn every dial and configure absolutely everything you want. You may be a user that's sophisticated enough to handle that. Or you may want to just be able to self-provision an application like a web server or a WordPress server or a database or whatever it might be. But you don't want to have to do all the configuration. You just want the ability to do that whenever you want, but you're perfectly happy to pick out a pre-configured system from a catalog. Getting the right level of empowerment according to whoever the user is, and obviously assuming there are multiple users all there at the same time. And lastly, to consider the needs of compliance and the CFO, and we do that with business policy, so that you're actually deciding ahead of time and automatically applying each and every time something is provisioned, so you can't get it wrong, to make sure that all of those compliance and load balancing and utilization and all those sorts of needs are catered for. So that's where we got to yesterday. So really what I want to start out with asking the panel, and I'm going to start with you, Sean, based on your experience and what you see us talking about there, have we got it right? Is that the right balance? Is that what the customers need?
Yeah, I think it's the right shareholders. I think it's empowerment without losing control, right? It's having tools in place that sort of provide a forcing function to enable business units and end users to feel empowered, but at the same time not losing control. And it's important to recognize that a lot of these groups, applications and development teams and IT operations, and of course compliance and the CFO, all are sort of separate entities. So getting them to work in collaboration together, empowering without losing control, I think is the key issue.
Right. Krish, how's that go for you?
I think I agree with them. In fact, you correctly identified the three stakeholders who are going to be important in this picture. While the biggest problem IT is facing today is users are just, unlike in the past where they used to have a server under their desk, like users are just using their credit cards and provisioning resources from Amazon. That is creating a big headache for them. So they want to ensure that they have control over what users in the sense developers and others in the business unit are using. They want to have a control over them. At the same time, they want to give an Amazon-like experience. And at the same time, they're also answerable to complaints, needs, and other things. So I think how you're going to balance all three with the right set of tools, that's going to be important.
Great. Bernard?
It's interesting. I was recalling that we were working with a company around this and talking about the need for self-service and the ability to really sort of get started more quickly. And we were talking about kind of the common model is you put up some kind of a portal or a service catalog or something like that. Somebody fills it out, presses a button, and they get resources and so forth. And I was talking to a guy out of operations, and he said, yeah, absolutely. They fill out the form, and they send it off, and it goes to the sysadmin who examines it and looks at it and decides what should be done. And I said, well, no, actually, they fill out the form and it drives all the way through a workflow and through orchestration to develop these things. He goes, yeah, absolutely. It drives all the way through, and then the guy looks at it, and we went back and forth, and it was like Godzilla and Mothra for about 5 minutes. And what struck me was he was coming out of an environment where the only way you could enforce policy was somebody smart, somebody with tacit knowledge, somebody who had learned all the rules, who could then apply them, and so his vision was limited to, you had to have a smart person who knew all this stuff, who this request would come into, who would then operationalize it within the infrastructure. And what that really brought home to me was, this is like a clash of worldviews going on here. And what we always talk to people about is, on the operations side, is they have to sort of recognize their future role is infrastructure administration or infrastructure management, not asset ownership. And it was a fascinating conversation. And at the end, we both kind of agreed to disagree and walked off and got coffee at other ends of the room, because it was just clear that the vision of how you would achieve this kind of policy just was really different. So it was a really fascinating way of looking at kind of the way these stakeholders played out. And it's not always a polite conversation. Let me put it that way.
When you consider all the different dimensions that you have to look at, I mean, the obvious one might be for load balancing. Where is the best place to put this new load? If you have to, you've got 100 servers, 1,000 servers. How is anybody possibly going to make that decision validly? And then on top of all that, even if you could make that decision, how about all the compliance issues about these guys shouldn't be on a physical server with those guys, or this data isn't allowed to cross a country boundary, or all those sorts of things. It would be impossible for a human to consider those, but of course a machine can do it in seconds. The key is to define the policies ahead of time and then make sure that nothing can be provisioned without that happening.
Yeah, if I could just follow up for just a moment. I mean, his assumption was that sysadmin would have that level of knowledge. And I think what he really overlooked was the fact that it is a bigger job than anyone could possibly hold in their head, and that his assumption was really misplaced. His assumption was, this person will understand all the rules in a way and blah, 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 and that's the way we always did it, failing to recognize that, in fact, probably for every 10 good decisions that person made, they made one bad one.
Right.
And that's the role of having some kind of automated policy.
Sure. Ted?
I guess I look at it a little bit differently. Your triangle implies that these three groups actually communicate with each other, and the way I look at it is there's a 10-foot wall between each one of these organizations, and essentially you've got the application development team that have this idea of consumption, and they create a consumption picture of what they would like. And then you've got IT with a delivery model that they would like, and they sort of pass each other over the wall, and hopefully they're the same thing. And there's another piece of this, which is we find a lot of the feedback we get from the enterprise is who's really the consumer, because there's clearly the application development team, but there's also the business unit. And so I would say there's potentially a fourth party here that would be the business unit playing into this.
Right, and you'll see one of the questions we asked yesterday, which we'll look at in a minute, is right around that, is have we got the set of stakeholders right? Yeah, with the triangle, what we were trying to show was you need to cater for the needs of all of those three, and I absolutely agree with you, they don't necessarily talk to each other, so that can cause us difficulties. Okay, so Jeremy, where is my glamorous assistant, Jeremy? There he is. Okay.
Unfortunately, it's only me. But
so let's see if we can bring the audience in. Any questions from the audience?
This is a free-for-all, right? They
so
can
far?
come in at any time on any place, but I still have to be able to see them. Who's going to start this off? Come along. It's going to be someone. There it is. You need women. More women. Come along.
Thank you. All right, so you all have experience with implementing cloud. Do you find that the tools from the various vendors for automated provisioning differ substantially in terms of usability? Or, I mean, I don't want you to criticize anybody, but if you can give me some insight into how the various tools stack up in terms of the differences in approach from the major vendors for automated provisioning. Both, I'm most interested in storage and network.
If anybody thinks that's a plant, it absolutely is not. So who'd like to pick that up?
I'll take a shot at it.
Go ahead, Bernard.
And of course, with the proviso that Abiquo is head and shoulders above everyone else, starting.
What is that?
Yeah. What I would say is that we sort of put the buckets into kind of, you got a lot of old breed who are kind of trying to bring forward into this environment, and a new breed. And what we find is a lot of the old breed tends to sort of assume a kind of very resource intensive, a lot of research, a lot of customization, and so forth, because that's the old model. That's what you had to do around the physical world. And there's a new breed that really is focusing much more on assuming a more agile infrastructure, and they tend to be more structured toward that and tend to be simpler to use. And so really that's the way we see it fall down.
Yeah, this is what we talked about role-based empowerment, really, to make sure that you empower users according to their need. And empowerment doesn't just mean switching options off and having things that don't work. It means simplifying the user interface so that it comes down to, for a user who wants something less sophisticated, you want to make it really easy to use, make there much less options. You don't want to disable things, you want to make them disappear. You want to add more levels of explanation into what you're doing. So they're still empowered, but you make it a much better experience for them according to their need. So yeah, absolutely. Any more questions? I can't actually see from here, Jeremy. So.
I can see, but I can't see a sufficient number of hands or
Okay.
raised with. So
we can
back to
move
you
on
for the
if you're
moment.
not ready.
If I could
Okay. Go ahead, Ted.
if I could add on that last one. We do benchmark research of what's going on in the enterprise, and so I can't speak specifically about the tools, but what I can tell you is that the feedback we get from enterprise IT people like yourselves is that most people are not using these tools at this time. Most people are still using whatever comes with the hypervisor and whatever they can cobble together, with scripts and in-house development. So we're actually we're trying to track it, but we're finding the adoption of these newer tools is still relatively low in mainstream enterprise. That's what we see.
I could add one more thing to it. What I am saying, I don't have a big team, so I am an individual. So I usually talk to the CIOs or IT managers and try to get my feedback. So what I'm saying is there are so many cloud tools, but what people are interested in is they don't want to see the compute resources as physical, virtual, and then cloud-based resources. They want to see it as just compute resources, and they want tools that could sort of give them probably a single pane of glass kind of a view towards all the compute resources.
Right.
And more and more enterprise customers are looking towards tools that could sort of completely simplify their life, irrespective of the kind of compute resource they're using.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sean?
So then, we do a lot of research in the enterprise, specifically speaking to CIOs, and I would agree that very few are actually using automated provisioning and policy tools. In fact, 71% of those that responded to a recent survey said it was out of plan, right? So they're not even thinking about it yet. And I think the reason why is we'll dig a little deeper. You asked a question around tools, right? And most, full transparency, I used to work for CA, but a lot of the provisioning tools, to be quite honest, look the same, right? And I think what this brings up is interesting to me as I think about this, because a lot of the problem behind automated provisioning, it's more of a process and organizational problem than it is a tool problem. So I have the tools that are available to do it. What I don't have is the ability to bring together disparate organizations to enable this to happen, right? So there's political, there's a lot of infighting, right? That it's not enabling this to take off the way it probably should be. So I think it's important to look at it from both perspectives of there's tools and technology, but we have a big process and organization problem as well.
That's good. That brings us neatly into our next slide here, which are the questions that I posed at the end of the keynote yesterday, and which we had some good feedback to on Twitter and on the blog. These were the questions. We'll address the first three, not the bottom one, for a moment. But the clear feedback we got on, has stakeholder conflict affected adoption in your organization was, just quote some comments. Amazon Web Services experience gives you much too much uncontrolled, and danger. It adds risk and danger in an enterprise organization. So empowering people to the extent of Amazon is way too much for an IT operations type organization. And the exact opposite of that is what the people who are the consumers said. IT is putting too many barriers in place. There was a comment made about, IT built us what it called a private cloud for us, and it was completely unusable because it didn't actually let us provision ourselves at all. All it did was put a series of workflow and ask us questions and all that kind of stuff, and it just wasn't usable by us. I think perhaps we should look at are the IT organizations just trying to cloud wash here and just give a little bit of functionality. They haven't really grasped that not only can they give their customers what they want and have it work for them, but it actually can be advantageous to them as well. Ted, why don't you have a go at that one?
Well, I think IT's stuck in the middle. IT's sitting there and it's getting pressure from the CFO, the CEO, the CMO coming home saying, we need a cloud, give me a cloud. And then they have the pressure from the app dev folks saying, I want self-provisioning and I want this cloud. And so IT's under all this pressure What we find is that IT is stuck with a lot of organizational structures that prevent them from actually implementing a cloud successfully. You know, that they can't bring all the resources together to be a common resource pool, because there's still a business unit that insists that its resources be separate from the other business unit. So I think the outside pressure from
You mean physical resources, you know, servers and storage and networks?
Yeah. Yeah, we find organizations having to stand up multiple private clouds to match the mindset of the corporation. It's kind of crazy, but
Yeah.
it does happen.
Not great for efficiency.
No, but so I think the long answer to the question is yes. I think stakeholder conflict does affect cloud adoption, and but I think a lot of that is because IT is just so squeezed between all these different forces.
Krish, what do you think?
I agree with him that there's definitely conflict, but rather than trying to analyze IT thinking, I would rather try to give something like an advice. So IT, on one side, IT is squeezed by compliance people, so that's something which they cannot avoid. But on the other side, there are developers who want Amazon kind of seamless experience, and on the top, people want to save money. So there is no way IT can avoid the move to cloud. So the thing is, it doesn't mean the role of IT is diminishing. It's just that instead of them being the center of everything, they are going to step back and sort of operate everything in a seamless way from the background, ensuring compliance while also giving a seamless experience. So I think it needs a mental shift. Whether IT likes it or not, just to make sure that I'm not having any war against IT, I was system admin in the past, so I understand the concerns most of these guys have. But whether IT likes it or not, they have to go back, take a step back and be in the background and let the developers get more empowered, and business units get what they want, and eventually let the organization make some more, save some extra cash.
We have to remember we're asking IT to change the way it's done stuff for the last 30 years doing this, you know, desperately trying to keep its arms around everything.
It's not going to be easy, there will be cultural wars, but I think eventually they're on the losing side. So they better do it in a very decent way and sort of let empower the developers. That's going to happen.
Okay, I'm not sure the losing side is a great tool. What do you think, Bernard?
Well, you know, it's very interesting about the stakeholder conflict. We recently did some strategy work with a very large information services company, and it was a bunch of different stakeholders. IT organization was building out their own private cloud. One of the business users said, yeah, we definitely want a private cloud, but we're not going to use theirs. We're going to build our own. And then another group said, we love the idea of cloud computing, but we're going to go use a public one and there was a huge legacy of mistrust to the central IT organization, because for years they'd been in the department of no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that, so forth and so on. And people said, what they're painting sounds great, or what the picture they're painting sounds great, but we're just not going to just put our confidence there, so we're going to go do our own thing. Huge amount I mean, they were pleasant enough with one another, but clearly a huge amount of organizational mistrust, legacy conflict, and so forth. They hadn't gone as far as what you had outlined, which I think is just amazing. You know, cloud sounds great, we'll have our own things.
Personal cloud.
I do think that there's a huge challenge for IT organizations, because they've got conflicting things, which is be the low-cost provider, cut your costs, but be as good as these other guys who have massive investment. I just think that's a really challenging position. I'll just come back to, our advice is we say they've got to rethink their position and become infrastructure managers, not asset owners. Because I think it's very difficult for those kinds of organizations to get the kind of investment to own the kind of assets to provide those kinds of capabilities.
So Sean, is this an education thing we're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things going on. One, I think IT is really, I think we all agree they're in a mess, right? They're virtualized. They've virtualized the number of workloads and applications they've virtualized has increased. The percentages of those workloads that they've virtualized has increased as well. They haven't, in essence, really been able to insert the right amount of tools, and their environments are getting sort of out of control. So they're really having a hard time moving from sort of virtualized one, I have a hypervisor, I've done this, I'm increasing my asset utilization, I'm lowering my costs, and I'm trying to be competitive, with then trying to move into more of a cloud-like infrastructure, right? So they're just starting to think about that. That's for most organizations. And two, there's no shared risk model. Right? It's like, you want me to do all this stuff, you want me to move workloads in and out of clouds, and you want me to use the public cloud, and you want me to do all these things, but you don't want to share the risk. What happens when something goes wrong? That's why I'm the department of no.
Right.
Right?
And so we all get hung up about this term cloud. Is this really virtualization 2.0? I mean,
most of the organizations that I talk to, when I start to talk to them, we talk to hundreds of CIOs, decision makers. When I ask them about these cloud functions, whether it be platform as a service, some of the hybrid tools that you would enable to go to a public cloud, most of them say to me, "Are you kidding me? We haven't even got over the virtualization hump yet. We aren't doing capacity planning correctly. Patch management's a problem. Network management's a problem. We haven't got our hands around all of those things yet. And now you're asking me about federating out to multiple public clouds? Not even close."
Well, that certainly brings up the point about the federating out. Now, what about if you're starting with your own on-premise private cloud and forget federating out till the future? Isn't it the case that a so-called cloud solution could actually help them in some of those other tasks, the sprawl and all those other tasks? If you actually delegated some of that management to the teams that own those servers, instead of trying to keep your hands all around it, could you actually not make your life easier?
Absolutely, but I still think that most organizations are in virtualization 1.0, moving to 2.0.
Right. I mean, clearly it's true that the number of adopters is, we're at a very early start of adoption.
They're in management and stabilization of their environment. They're building out their private clouds, and then they'll move into hybrid and maybe to public.
Yeah.
But I think tools will obviously enable more rapid movement.
I think it is very much virtualization 2.0 for many companies, but to what we're talking about here is, I think there are aspects of the private cloud that resonate very well with IT. Elasticity, shared resources, common pools. Then you get into self-provisioning and automation. And that's when I think...
That's when they panic?
That's when we see the real concerns come up.
Right.
Is that, I can handle this idea of a common shared pool of resource that I'm provisioning. But when you get into automated provisioning, that's when we start getting pushback on, yes, I've got a private cloud, but I'm not doing automated provisioning.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the point we were trying to make about you've got to balance the need, but it is possible to balance the needs between those people if you put the right controls in place so that IT operations can see what's going on, has overall control of what's going on. If you like, is giving each of those guys a sandbox with given dimensions that they can't exceed, but yet within that sandbox they can do what they need to do and get the self-service provisioning. That's I think the point we were making. Okay, let's talk about out there. What do you guys think?
What we neglected to say, of course, is that Pete and I will be buying a drink to the asker of the next 3 questions in the bar at 7 o'clock.
Actually, I thought a better thing would be to say everybody who asks a question, we'll give them an extra monster. How about that?
Ah, here you are, monster galore.
Yeah, questions are happening fast.
Hi. A lot of companies are rolling what they call private clouds and public clouds. And there's a number of providers who roll what they call hybrid clouds, which are some sort of mixture between the two. Do you think that a hybrid cloud is achievable in a true large enterprise environment? And what are some of the risks and concerns around that?
Well, of course, you can build a cloud, a private cloud from multiple different data centers. So you can own them all, and they can be all around the world. So to that extent, you can do that and still keep it private. Our experience would be that customers want a model where they can go to hybrid in the future. That's what we hear. What do you guys think, Bernard?
Well, I think that hybrid cloud is the most ambiguous term in the entire industry, and it covers a multitude of sins. But what I often hear as people saying, oh, I want a hybrid cloud, is, I'm going to have a workload, I'm going to put it in my own private cloud because that's the best place and blah, blah, blah. But when load goes up, I'm going to transfer stuff out to the public cloud and it's going to magically, we think that is a pipe dream. That, hybrid cloud for us is multiple deployment choices. When I go to deploy the app, I might put it here, or I might put it there. That makes sense. That is a policy kind of a decision, might have a lot of different factors, and that I think is pretty reasonable, pretty achievable. The vision that sort of says I'm going to have these workloads migrating back and forth, we just don't see how that works within the bounds of the normal laws of physics.
Yeah, it would be pretty unfeasible. It's pretty remarkable that you can make it work within a data center down a piece of copper that's 3 feet away. To do it remotely would be pretty hard.
Yeah.
The decision is around when you provision it, then you've got a choice of where it's going to go. Krish?
Yes, I would like to add to Bernard's point. Yes, it doesn't make sense from the normal laws of physics point of view. And another thing is like, if you can put that workload in the public cloud, why do you want to put it back in the private cloud? It makes no sense to me. So I think probably if Randy Bias has his way, even the H word should be banned from the entire dictionary.
Well,
so,
I mean, all things being equal, the only reason to consider public cloud is if it's cheaper, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no.
I don't see any reason why you want to move back and forth. Like, and again, you have other problems related to physics there. But
so
if you can put it in the public
a decision about when you first
put it
provision,
there, where do you want to bring
can
it
I
back?
put it there?
Yeah.
But to the question about the public cloud, though, your comment about the only reason you would go there because it's cheaper, I think the other real use of the public cloud is the elasticity of the public cloud, that you can have it's pretty hard to have cost effectively in your own data center. So, but I agree 100% with Bernard that this idea of cloud bursting applications from the data center to the
dynamically, well, the thing is yeah, that's not going to happen.
Is something that, at least the feedback we get, is that's maybe not a
speed of
pipe
light
dream, but
figure away.
certainly is way out there.
Yeah,
More questions? Sorry, Sean.
No, I would agree that hybrid cloud is sort of an option, right? So you have workloads and where's my best execution environment for a specific application, but the seamless movement between the two, at least in my time, I don't.
It's a policy-based provisioning decision,
Exactly.
not something
Exactly.
later. Okay, more questions.
Right by the camera, we have a question.
You already touched a little bit about that. If you advise CIO about the top 3 best practice or the top 3 pitfalls when they decided to migrate to infrastructure as a service.
Can you wave, because I've got absolutely no idea where you are. Okay, great. Sorry, can you repeat the question? Do we hear the question?
Didn't quite hear.
I didn't.
Could we have a rerun of that?
Yes, I'm just wondering, you guys already touched a little bit about that. If you advise CIO to migrate to infrastructure as a service, what's the top 3 pitfalls or the top 3 best practice you recommend to them, depending on your own experiences?
So
Thanks.
advising a CIO, top 3 pitfalls, top 3 best practices. Want to do one each? Deeps? Yeah.
Well, I would say in terms of the top 3 pitfalls, certainly there's vendor lock-in is one of the most significant concerns, security and compliance concerns about privacy and personally identifiable information or protected health information in the public cloud. But on the best practice, the one I would say is that you need to take a risk-based approach on a workload by workload basis to determine where's the best place to put this workload. Private, public, co-location, where do you want to stick it? And, well, doesn't sound right, but where do you want to put this workload?
So you need to consider what the application is, who are the people that are putting it there,
Yes.
all of that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Okay. Who wants to do best practices? Bernard, do you want to have a go at best practices?
Well, I'll suggest one. We think that there's a lot of people say, I'm going to do cloud computing because I vend virtual machines. You can request a virtual machine and get a virtual machine in an automated fashion. And that's fantastic. But from our perspective, that is not cloud computing. That is a more efficient way of vending virtual machines, which is great. If you want to achieve the vision of elasticity and scale and so forth, which is an increasing proportion of enterprise type applications, you have to wrap that around some kind of a what we call an application management framework. Some kind of tool that's going to be doing monitoring the application, adding and subtracting resources according to some kind of rules or governance or some kind of event like load or something like that, absolutely crucial. Because in our view, where this really breaks down is when people say, I'm going to write an app and it's going to somehow, because I put it in the cloud, it's going to magically scale and unscale, absent some kind of framework that manages that application. A product like Abiquo, and there's others, it's not Abiquo's the only one, but a product like that, you are going to not get cloud computing. You're going to get a kind of a faster virtualization. And we would say absolutely fundamental. And if you don't think that through, you're going to be really disappointed what you're going to get when you say we've got cloud computing.
I'll take a shot at the best practice. Actually, this is more of a wishful thinking from my side, and I'm hoping by telling CIOs to do something, I can get the providers to do something, follow up on that. I think CIOs should demand that the providers give them access, programmatic access to the security inside their inside their solution or inside their premises. So I'll just try to pin something that's happening, and probably see if there are providers here, they should consider that Cloud Security Alliance is sort of coming out with something called cloud audit specs. So I wish every cloud provider in the world takes up cloud audit specs and sort of implement it in their premises, so that CIOs, enterprises can programmatically access and check if the security meets their own security needs. And I think by adding pressure from the enterprise point of view, we can eventually get the cloud providers to do it. I think that is something which every CIO should demand when they negotiate with the cloud provider.
So Sean, just a few seconds. I guess the last one is yours.
Well, quickly, I'll just go a little bit differently. I wouldn't underestimate the organizational and process changes that need to be made. Just have a couple of minutes, but chargeback it's a big issue. I don't know how many of you have actually done chargeback within an organization, but it's really difficult. And it's political change, it's process change, it's people change. So I wouldn't underestimate that, and I would make sure that I get the right process and organizational change done, or at least thought about before I move into infrastructure as a service or moving to a public cloud at home.
Which leads us very neatly into the next topic here.
Done that twice,
we talked about, which was over-provisioning, and our belief that over-provisioning is in fact a really big issue, and that seems to have been echoed by the comments we've had. Let's just recap on what we meant. You have your actual requirements as a consumer, the actual thing that you need to provision. Let's say it's a virtual machine with storage and networking. What actually tends to happen, we believe, is that you provision typically more, you ask for more than you need because of an immediate perceived expansion need. It's natural to ask for probably double what you actually require. And then you ask for it ahead of time because it takes, in the non-automated world, it takes so long for IT to provision it for you. In an enterprise, that can be weeks, even months sometimes. And then, so you ask for it before you need it, so it's hanging around doing nothing for a while. And then at the end of it, you don't give the thing up, you leave it hanging around, and that could be for any amount of time. And you don't give it up because A, you've got to, somebody's got to remind you to go and tell IT you don't need it anymore, and B, it took you so long to get the damn thing, you tend to keep it around for a rainy day. This was our suggestion. And we got some very interesting feedback on the blog about this, so I'll read you some direct comments. Over-provisioning is endemic. Was one comment. Another where they, in this guy's organization, they'd actually, and if you're here and want to tell us about it in a minute, that'd be great. In our organization, we went around and we actually monitored and searched for virtual machines that had no CPU activity, no disk activity, no network activity. In other words, they were sitting there idle. 20%, more than 20%, he said, of the virtual machines they had were sitting there doing nothing. Now that is a vast amount of over-provision. That is costing a vast amount of money that you don't need to spend. Think of it, if you didn't have that, you'd be saving 20%. It's huge. So one of the ways that we started looking at this, which ties into exactly what Sean was saying, is instead of thinking about charge back and show back, actually start thinking about show forward, which is exactly the opposite of what happens in the Amazon model. Because of Amazon's vested interest, it doesn't want you to know how much this thing is going to cost you. It's almost impossible to work it out. You find out when you get your credit card bill at the end of the month. So what we did to address that was to have this little pop-up. You probably can't read it, but I'll give you a clue. What this is appearing at the moment you decide to provision your virtual machine, your virtual appliance, your virtual resource. It pops up and tells you what it's going to cost you. Now, you can implement this without having to go through your rigmarole, Sean, of chargeback, which is a big deal. I agree. You can implement this, and we believe that this can actually start to change people's behavior. But it's conditional upon you having all of the pieces. People are only going to provision what they need. You know, this reminds you. This says, this is costing you X. So you might think about X if you see it ahead of time. And if you can just do what we call just-in-time provisioning, you're empowered to do that. You might not actually ask for that resource until you need it. You might ask only for what you need, knowing that you have the control to expand it when you need to, and that you can get rid of it when you're done. We think that could change behavior. So is this Bernard, do you think, first of all, this is as significant an issue as we suggest it might be?
Well, I mean, our perspective is that chargeback will become a fundamental requirement for IT, in part because there's now an available public set of benchmarks. I know what this costs me if I go to Amazon, Rackspace, Terramark, whoever it is. What's it cost me? And not in this kind of general, at the end of the quarter, I get a huge bill that I have no idea what it was used for. And anything along the way that identifies costs and sort of tracking them back to usage, I think is really crucial, because our belief is 5 years from now, certainly 10 years from now, every IT organization will be an expectation. What is the granular cost of a gigabyte of storage per month, or whatever it is? Because that's my expectation. Just like in our regular lives, we look out and we say it costs so much for a gallon of gas down at Chevron or wherever. If I get it somewhere else, what does it cost me? I have that expectation, and the same thing will become true for IT.
You see the price on the pump before you decide to pump your gas.
Yeah.
Ted, what about the issue of over-provisioning? Is that something you recognize? Do you think it's out there?
Yeah, it's absolutely out there. When we asked organizations, what's holding back the success of your private cloud, the number one concern was sprawl. And it's directly related to this also, which is without chargeback, there's no friction. Without friction, there's sprawl. And so, absolutely, the over-provisioning is something that's one of the big concerns about self-provisioning, is it opens the door to over-provisioning.
And do you think this, to some extent, might address that?
Yeah, I think actually wiring this to the seat so the guy gets a shock that's proportional to the
cost per month. Yeah.
Proportional to the cost would work better. But no, I think this definitely adds that level of feedback.
Right.
So somebody can make an informed
decision.
decision.
I like Bernard's analogy that you see it at the price on the petrol pump before you decide to pump your gas.
Yeah.
Which is great.
In fact, I was about to make that point. Like, I would, instead of me seeing a pop-up showing that this is what it's going to cost me, as an end user, if I'm going to use a dashboard to manage my computer resources, every single screen should be showing exactly, based on my action, how the cost is going to be by the end of the month.
Yeah, and we showed an example of, not quite the example you're talking about, but we showed an example where you could configure an application yesterday, and we had sliders where you could play with it, exactly how big and small it was, and you could see the price going up and down as you did it. So encouraging you to, well, do I really need that much? Let's think and let's try and tune it. Yeah, this is a coarse example.
As an end user, that will sort of make me really provision what I need and not over provision. So I think that will help in a complete shift in the way we use.
Sean?
I'd like to see it go one step further. I'd like to see an email go to their boss or someone that sets policy, right? It depends who it is. I mean, I may not care that it costs me $45, right? But if it's going to my boss, the email's going to my boss, and I have some policy checkoff that has to happen, maybe that would be something you could add to this. I just guess it's dependent upon who's on the other end.
Yeah, I guess
that's my first.
I guess you've got to balance the yeah, sure. If you send an email to your boss saying that this guy provisioned this and it's costing this much, then it's going to make you think. What you've got to be careful of is not to put approval workflows and stuff in the way, because then you kill the just-in-time thing.
I'm just thinking of policy associated with it as well.
So I think Bernard's a shock proportional to the cost is what we need.
Going to the boss.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So basically, you need to get a behavioral change, and I think
Yeah.
you have to get.
So what do you guys think? Where's Jeremy? There he is.
I'm right here.
What do you guys think about this? Is this going to change behavior?
Oh, I had a question earlier. One of you guys talked about earlier the conflict with IT, and you didn't have a chance because you changed to the next.
Okay, well let's have it out now.
Yeah, I just what I understood is there isn't enough tools for people to buy with a value proposition to get people to move from whatever their private environment to the cloud. Is that correct or not?
Jeremy, can you hear that? Because I can't.
I can't hear any better than you can because of the speaker.
The question is, you guys mentioned the conflict with the IT operation and not buying into the cloud thing, right? So is it just me, or do I understand that cloud computing doesn't have enough tool? It's not mature enough to migrate people, companies or IT environments to the cloud. Because if I had a company, I don't have a company, but I would be more proactive of providing a tool or software that could allow an easy migration and put policies and control and make the IT guys just implementers, not decision makers.
Okay, so are we mature enough to allow that migration to happen to the cloud? Who wants to take that?
The short answer is no, but the thing is it depends on the kind of workload. So some of the workloads can definitely go into the cloud. So that's why I said you should be able to have a tool that gives you a way to look at workloads running on physical infrastructure to virtual to cloud. So it's yes and no, I would say.
And it does depend on whether you're talking about public cloud or private cloud. There are issues around trying to put enterprise apps on the public cloud. One of them was actually raised on the blog. How do we get Windows directory services to our stuff out there? How do we get that to work? So there are definitely some issues, but I think the message is that there is some stuff you can do now. Any more questions on this topic we're on here on the cost side? Will this change behaviour? Anybody like to pick that up?
You have to wind up.
Okay.
You're out of time.
Great. Thank you all very much. Thank you, panelists. And please continue the discussion on the...
Just before you go, on a housekeeping note, we'll thank the panel in a moment, just because I think this is the last time we're congregated in this room. 2 housekeeping things. The show floor is open after this next session, so you've got a session to go. Show floor, refreshments, courtesy of one of our sponsors. And then if you're making your decisions in the morning, please wake up.